Thanks, Josh. Yeah. All right, gonna start sharing my screen. Can you give me a thumbs up, or you guys can hear me okay?
Everything's great. Looks good.
Okay, awesome. So as Josh had said, I'm Nick Fett, and I am the CTO of Tellor. Today we're going to kind of talk about all of the different oracles in DeFi. But to tell you guys a little bit about Tellor, this talk is not about Tellor, but we are a decentralized oracle on Ethereum. So, if you haven't heard about Tellor or you're looking to get data into your smart contracts, definitely go give Tellor a look, tellor.io. We also are sponsoring the hackathon. So if you guys are doing a hack and need some pricing data into your DApp, definitely go give it a look. So yeah, now I'll just kind of get started on some oracles in DeFi in general. So kind of before I get into what's currently being used by DeFi, let's kind of get into the love story between oracles and blockchains, and then really just how it all went down. So even before Ethereum, so these glorified escrow contracts, which we call smart contracts, realized that they actually needed a way to access off-chain information. So early adopters of Bitcoin, Ethereum, they, that just playing around with these digital ledger entries is just only so much fun if you can only reference these kind of self-contained transactions. And so the dream of having access to off-chain information began. They started on with the early visions were derivatives, stable coins, prediction markets, and basically, gambling protocols that us in the crypto space all really like. And, like any good community of entrepreneurs would do, people set out to build these things, and it was great. And it worked. So, we have derivatives, stable coins, prediction markets, and all of those things. But now we're actually looking back, and a lot of people are kind of examining those, and they're wondering if this was kind of the dream all along. Is this what people had thought? As more money gets thrown at these protocols, we have to look and say like, hey, well, all along we needed the oracles in order to make this possible, and we knew that we needed the oracle technology. But do we actually have the oracle technology? Is it actually trustless like we had been originally promised? So kind of stepping back from, the DeFi in general, like let's look at like what an oracle actually is. So before there was any differentiation between on-chain versus off-chain data, all you had were these databases. So the question a decade ago was very similar to the oracle problem. How do you come to consensus on a piece of data in a decentralized way? As we all know, the answer to this question was Bitcoin and the blockchain. So, regardless of what system you're running, they all these layer ones have various ways of agreeing upon specified data. So, in Bitcoin's case, it's who's sending what to who. And all of this is sort of built into the system. You have a consensus layer that's built in, and oracles are different. So oracles are built on top of these layer ones. They don't have a pre-specified consensus mechanism most of the time. So, you don't really just have these sort of pre-specified opcodes. You need information on some event or state that's not at all related to your blockchain. So the big difference, I guess, between oracles and normal data is that now the consensus layer is on chain. So namely, whenever I say consensus piece, it's just the pieces that determine, okay, who can push the data and who determines whether or not this data is correct. And that's what an oracle system is. So moving on. Okay, so now that we sort of know the basis of what an oracle is, let's kind of get into some of the designs. So to talk about like what's the most simple oracle design, and this would just be one person. So I think we all know this one. It's a centralized oracle. So if you have if your DApp needs an oracle, you can just enter in the price yourself. So you enter it in. For those that don't know, the biggest name for this method in the Ethereum space is Provable. It's formerly called Oracleize, and it works really well. It's obviously a completely centralized model, but it's sort of very open, very transparent. It's easy to see who's in charge. The obvious risk of centralization in your Oracle, though, is that they can either manipulate your price, or if they let's say they just shut down their servers for some reason, you don't even get a price. So you're sort of left hanging. And that latter problem is what we actually call a liveness guarantee. So moving on to the second easiest design, this would be a multi-sig. So for this design, you don't just whitelist one person, you would like whitelist a bunch of people. And they all place data on chain, and then you take the median or average or some other transformation that you want to do. And as you can tell, so this is a little bit better, more like, the V2 Oracle. But, to kind of get to the end here, if this is the V2 Oracle, most of DeFi right now is like between 1.5 and 2.5. We're really at the stage of, we're just moving past the multi-sig wallet stage. So the next design, so there's kind of more designs, and a lot of designs are sort of built upon complicated multi-sig wallets. A slightly worse version, I would say, is, you have multiple parties off chain and they all sign the prices, and then you have people who push on chain. So you would have like, say some exchanges sign it, and then a centralized party will push the data on chain, and it sort of just separates who can manipulate your prices versus who's in control of the liveness guarantee. So, you may both have collusion and liveness issues, and it may be separated, which may help, but it really just depends on the nuances of the design. And really, a big question you have to ask yourself with these reputation-based systems, so anything that uses like a multi-sig or known parties, is whether or not more parties that are known make something more decentralized or censorship resistant. And that's really a big question that you have to think about in DeFi in general. So, if you have Goldman, Deutsche Bank, and Bank of America setting your price, is that better than just JP Morgan setting your price? And maybe. I think it's not quite the home run that the Bitcoin OGs dreamt of, but it's some people will try and argue that yes, this is decentralization, but that's for you to decide. Okay, more designs quickly. So the next one, kind of like if you assume like the multi-sig is like a POA system, comparing them to layer ones, you could also do like a delegated proof of stake Oracle, where you have them actually put a stake in, and then they can sign the data, and they lose a stake if they lie. This is maybe slightly better. You add a little bit of a crypto economic piece, but usually this one, you have a big problem with who the whitelister is. So who gets to say, is it open for everyone to stake? Usually not. Can the whitelister just instantly take everyone out of the whitelist and put their own people on? There's a lot of details that even if it is like a delegated proof of stake, you really have to look into it, or else it's probably just no better than a POA Oracle. And kind of like the last one for design, this is sort of a positive note, would be like a prediction market Oracle. They're probably not as popular. I think maybe they're making a comeback, like UMA uses a sort of version of this, and I think UMA is right after me. So you guys can talk about this, talk to Hart. But anyway, so prediction market oracles, you basically bet on what the outcome's going to be. And as long as, people want to make money and 51% of your system is honest, you'll get the right answer. And these guys were great. So this was some of the original Oracle design. So the Augur and Gnosis, they kind of wrote a lot of literature in the space about kind of crypto economic security of oracles. And I like it a lot. Unfortunately, so the big problems with this is sort of speed. One, it can take a while. And unfortunately, I know we don't care about it a lot, but regulatory concerns. So prediction markets are kind of illegal here in the US. And then just liquidity and cost concerns as far as the cost to actually get data out. So they've sort of become kind of untenable for a lot of the DeFi's needs. But yeah, you guys can ask Hart about that next. But anyway, that's kind of what's currently in use in DeFi at the moment. So, obviously people are designing new things and lots of people are raising money for Oracle. So I I think we're actually going to start seeing users starting to demand some better options here. Similar to how you saw, first with crypto, centralized exchanges really took off, or, stable coins, you saw Tether really first just gobble up everything. And it takes some time before people actually start to care about the points of centralization. But I think, you had a little bit of an Oracle bubble this year, and people should start realizing that this is a thing. So, but, despite all of these centralized designs, we've always sort of known how to decentralize something. Anytime you're trying to crypto economically validate data, we do this with Bitcoin and every other layer one. So you have some way to pick some anonymous group to enter in your information. So some anonymous person or group of persons, and then you add in some sort of maybe like some probabilistic finality, so that way the community in general can collectively agree upon whether or not to accept this answer. As long as you sort of make it economically expensive to pretend to be the majority, it's sort of good to go. That's how all of the blockchains do it, and that's kind of how Tellor built our system, and I think others are starting to see the same thing. But there are drawbacks whenever you do this. So, like any actually decentralized layer one chain, if you want to sort of make an oracle that's secure and decentralized, it's not going to be very fast. It's going to be slow. So, the scalability trilemma holds for oracles and sort of securing data as well. And anyone who sort of tells you differently, they probably have a coin to sell you. So, we sort of get it when it comes to layer one. So, if somebody comes up to you and says that they've solved the scalability trilemma and it's fully fast and decentralized, you sort of laugh at them. But then, projects will try and build, something, and they're like, well, we need an oracle that updates every block. And it's just like, well, you're trying to validate data at the same speed as Ethereum. It's going to be really, really hard. So now that we sort of looked at the models, and hopefully you guys get the framework, let's look to kind of see what's in use in DeFi. And, I was going to go over, to be honest, that there's not a whole lot of projects in DeFi that actually use oracles that have volume. So, despite all of the Oracle buzz and all of the partnerships you may see there, people with like real volume up there, it's like, like 20 projects maybe. Like if you look at real projects with volume on Ethereum, it's not it's an amount that you can sort of go over them all. So I'm just going to go over some of the big ones here, and then you guys can sort of take their designs or some of these designs and do your test on the smaller ones on your own. Okay. So first on the list, of course, probably the biggest DeFi project over the past few years, it's Maker. So depending on how you measure it and how you measure its size in DeFi, DAI is huge. It's a great project. So DAI is a stable coin for those that don't know, and on their Oracle, they have an Oracle for a lot of different pieces for the multi-collateral DAI, mainly. They used to just be ETH US dollar, and other projects use their Oracle as well. So notably like DYDX used to use them as well. So just keep that in mind. But as far as what Maker's Oracle actually is, it's kind of a complex proof of authority model with a little bit of secrecy. So they have a model where they have a bunch of reporters who sign prices. You don't know who these reporters are, and then people can relay these prices into a medianizer, and then it goes into their smart contracts. So actually, the only reason, so it is this, it's a relatively simple model, one that sort of goes with some of the design pieces that I showed. The only reason I wouldn't give them like a complete failing design is actually the thing at the end there, their Oracle security module. So this is a smart contract where they actually have an hour-long delay to any Oracle updates. And this is a phenomenal thing. So, kind of like I was saying, you don't want to expect your Oracle to be fast and final. They don't, which is great. So the token holders can sort of vote to stop anything that's bad that comes through their Oracle. So even though they have, say, maybe a slightly more centralized Oracle, like the token holders and hopefully the decentralized voting aspect of it can can shut it all down, which is good. So, if you're using Maker or Dai or one of these things, this is the Oracle that you're relying on. And then hopefully you guys are paying attention to it and you can sort of shut it down. So I know they did have some issues March 12th. So some of the issues may come with maybe like the liveness guarantee, because so you have these Oracle reporters who are supposed to push the price to chain. Well, if the price of the collateral goes down by too much, well, the problem actually happens is now you're actually going to kick off a bunch of CDP liquidations. So a bunch of contracts are going to get closed out. There's not a whole lot of incentive that these guys have to push this to chain. They might not want to pay really high gas prices to push this through because it's going to cause their whole system a whole bunch of grief. And that's kind of a bad thing. So, I think, maybe somebody who's like trying to do maybe if one of them is like trying to win at the auctions or something, but you definitely want to align the incentives correctly. But overall, it's pretty good. I like the OSM. Next, sort of very, very similar design would be Compound. Compound it's a very, very similar system to Maker's, except they have their own reporters. So their open Oracle system kind of, from last time I had checked, I believe that their vision is to have a list of kind of known parties, whether it's Coinbase's Oracle, for instance. I know you guys just had a talk from Coinbase, so Coinbase would sign a price, and Binance would sign a price, and Kraken would sign a price, and all of these different very well trusted parties would sign a price, and then you have relayers who push it on chain. And similar to Maker, they also have a piece in there as well that they don't expect it to be super fast and final. So yeah, that's kind of the Compound model. Sort of a very similar structure to Maker's. And now kind of for the last DeFi projects with a bit of volume, you have Synthetics, Aave, BZX, Set. These guys all use Chainlink. So I know Chainlink has 1 billion partners, but as far as DeFi with, volume over the past, more than the last few months, this is kind of the A-list, I'd say. As a disclaimer, though, this is kind of my best knowledge how Chainlink currently works. It's sort of hard to figure out, and I run an Oracle in the space. So that's probably a negative, but Chainlink at the moment, they have a centralized whitelisting agency, and they get various nodes to report price feeds. So they have a bunch of stuff on their roadmap, but what's live now is sort of a centralized reputation of Chainlink based Oracle. They have a bunch of known parties. So that is it. There's basically just a few structures that people are using for oracles at the moment. And, I need also, just as I kind of went through this, just because you actually have a good method, even if you did have a perfect oracle, just because you have a great method for getting data on chain doesn't mean that the data is even a good fit. So that's actually a different issue. Because oracles and following some of the best practices regarding oracles are like half the battle. The other half is like picking what data you should choose. So, the number of derivatives projects out there who use like some last traded price on an exchange or some very illiquid auction for their settlement prices, it's kind of ridiculous and embarrassing here in the DeFi space because, traditional finance has sort of written a whole lot of literature on what makes a robust settlement price, and we don't really follow it too well. So hopefully that can change, but that's kind of for a different talk. Anyway, now on to, I'll just kind of wrap up and then we can have some questions, but like why it actually matters. So I'm sure you guys have heard it like a million times. So we as a space are kind of having an identity crisis, like what is crypto built for? What is Ethereum built for? And what's the purpose of DeFi? Are we making backend slightly more efficient, or are we creating something that's actually resistant to the current power structures? So the big problem with using centralized oracles is that there's a choke point. There's a squeeze that regulators can go after, or people can do a rug pull, and all of this money is at risk. I don't mind if one group voting on things isn't decentralized and token distribution isn't quite there. Like that's an issue for governance, and it's sort of more transparent. And I believe we are talking about it, but the problem is like whenever people are saying that oracles are decentralized, and there's actually just a handful of people that control the majority of money in DeFi. And that's a big problem. You'll hear a lot of arguments that we rely on reputation, and the fact that like some of these people wouldn't want to ruin their reputation. But this is the same argument you could make for letting a consortium of banks like set your settlement price. We want to move away from this in DeFi, and hopefully we start doing that. So I just lastly, just for like the solution, I think the solution is going to come from a lot of the projects. So the current designs of oracles are centralized for a large part because they're sort of shoehorned into products that don't work with decentralized ones. We're all into the crypto space, and we're all in the crypto space. We know how to decentralize something. So if your buddy has a finance application and it has a centralized server, and he's wanted to look like he wanted to know what it would look like on Ethereum. So what would you tell him? So first, you would probably go to him and you would tell him that he really, really needs to think about whether or not he wants to do this. You would explain to him things like probabilistic finality, slow block times, and congestion issues. And, if he still thought it made sense, you tell him that his users might have to wait a bit for confirmations, that they're gonna have to pay this thing called gas to do anything with your application. And mainly this just wouldn't be a sales pitch. It's not like a plug and play server. There would be edge cases he'd need to handle, new procedures. It would not be like this quick hack that he could just, use Ethereum. And, he'd probably come back to you and say something, well, what if we like progressively decentralize, or we'll just like move all of the, price reads onto Ethereum or something. And you tell him that, you're only as strong or as decentralized as your weakest point. It probably wouldn't matter. It would be basically for a press release. And I guess like, why do we build on top of oracles differently? Like right now, like it wouldn't make any sense. Like if you need sort of instant finality in your oracles, it's just not going to be good. So, right now, a lot of these Oracle projects and a lot of these kind of DeFi projects, they just kind of add lots of complexity in order to hide some of the decentralization, to hide the centralization components of it. So, if you're trying to do something that's really, really fast, or you're trying to do something that, you're just trying to copy a centralized server and put it over here and you need an Oracle that does it, it's not going to work. So anyway, solution, supply, demand-based. We need to supply and demand better. We need to just be more transparent about it. And that's what we're kind of trying to do at Tellor. DeFi in general tries to just build financial products that are just building financial products just for the sake of it. If we keep this up, we're probably just going to get regulated out of existence or fail to scale because we aren't really going to have any meaningful differentiation. So it's okay to build things in an actual decentralized way. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening. To end the talk though, if you're building a project and need an Oracle, give Tellor a call. Josh, thanks for listening.
Great, thanks, Nick. And if you've got a couple minutes, we can do a couple of questions here. So one thing, obviously we're very early in kind of the Oracle space, and what this looks like in a couple of years in a more sophisticated market is still kind of unclear. Do you expect that there will be a lot of specialization of Oracle services, by data type, or maybe by what kind of security guarantees a project might need for an Oracle, or do you expect that this is kind of a situation where there's a lot of advantages to one protocol being used for oracles? So how do you see that breaking down in the future?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there will be. So, similar to like maybe like layer ones, kind of relating it back there, where if you sort of streamline what data you're providing, you can make things faster. People can come to consensus faster if it's not this sort of generalized prediction market type Oracle where your people have to manually go and check and answer everything. That's like Tellor. What we do is we only do numerical answers, and you sort of have to specify it off chain beforehand so we know what you're talking about, and then we can be slightly faster than everybody has to go figure out what API to look at and where to get these pricing information. So I definitely think it'll be much more specified oracles. And I think also, there is some space for maybe a centralized oracle or a decentralized oracle and different kind of guarantees along the spectrum. So yeah, there's a world with multiple different oracles. You just want to sort of be transparent about it. And, you want to, everybody's going to have to compromise somewhere. So you want to be sort of transparent about where you're making your compromises.
Okay. And I guess one thing I'm curious about, just a question from me, is, you mentioned that, we need to demand and supply better. What do you think is, going to be the thing that, pushes the Ethereum space, the DeFi space, to, demand more decentralized Oracle solutions? Like what is going to be the event, or what is going to be the trend that, causes the ecosystem kind of upgrade itself in the way you described?
Unfortunately, it's always like a hack or a regulatory event. As you saw with like centralized exchanges, like when do people want to move towards decentralized exchanges more? And it's like, usually, the reason decentralized exchanges in a lot of ways have had the success they've had is because the regulators sort of cracked down and forced all of the centralized exchanges to do KYC AML on all of their customers. And so people want to be able to trade without doing that. And that's why DEXs have sort of succeeded in my mind. And I think you'll see a similar thing with DeFi is, if regulators start cracking down on centralized oracles or pieces of DeFi where they're setting their own price, you'll probably see people start moving more towards decentralized oracles.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Nick. Really enjoyed your talk. Thanks for joining us.